Great. So welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Alessandria Polizzi, and I am the CEO of Verdant Consulting. And I'm so excited to provide this session for everyone on burnout risks for the HR professional. This is sponsored by, helped to coordinate by, and really supported by the Trainers and Consultants Referral Network. So if you're in the market for training support or other types of support, feel free to reach out to them. And they've been a great partner and supporter of this work. Our company focuses on building resiliency and psychological safety within organizations. As part of that, we also support the emotional well-being of HR teams in particular, and so as well as full leadership teams and organizations. So I'm going to be focused, though, on just us HR peeps today, so that we can talk about our needs, which often get ignored. So let's dig in. So we're going to talk about common burnout risks for the HR professional. These won't get to all of the burnout risks that can exist within the HR profession, but it will at least give you a primer for understanding maybe why you're feeling the way you're feeling or why you've felt the way you've felt in the past. As I mentioned, we are a top 20 workplace wellness provider for 2022. We provide resiliency skills training and training on navigating stressful and challenging situations based on neuroscience and cognitive behavior theory. So all science and evidence-based. So one of the things that comes up a lot when people talk about or think about burnout is we think that it's pretty much within the fold of related to COVID, that now that COVID's over, all of this should just go back to normal. But the fact of the matter is, if you really look at the data, we are also a country in mourning. We've had over 1 million people die. And so with that comes the emotional weight of processing that loss. And so giving ourselves credit for even that alone being a struggle, I think is important to pay attention to. But the thing is that COVID isn't the only thing that's driving some of the emotional weight and exhaustion that we experience in our workplaces, be it cost of living, the war in the Ukraine, people leaving who we've had long-term relationships with, inflation, actually climate change, according to the World Health Organization and the Association for Psychology, American Psychology Association, climate change is actually the biggest threat to our mental health, more so than anything else that we have experienced, and will only accelerate over time. And so getting our arms around why we experience the things we experience is important and critical for us to think about as we plan our future. And the data is pretty clear that we are in a crisis point when it comes to HR. So one study showed that about 80% of HR teams feel like they're not thriving. People in HR feel like they're not thriving. But a more recent report, and when I originally did this, we were at 70%. A more recent report showed that 98% of HR teams are experiencing burnout. So if we think about that, that's basically all of us experiencing signs of burnout. So let's talk about it and what's going on and why. One of the reasons that I say that we are having had a difficult time over the last 2.5 years is we've had to go through the same changes as the rest of the organization while leading the charge in people understanding those changes. So I love this Ann Richards quote about Ginger Rogers. We're basically doing the same moves as everyone else, but backwards and in heels, right? So we are humans who've had to navigate difficult times. We've also had to put our, a big kid pants on and be the one who calmly led the organization through these changes. We're both. And so that can make this a more stressful experience for many of us. But here's the thing, and I say this as a former chief people officer myself, we don't do a lot of focus. We don't focus a lot of our energy on us. So I did this survey early 2021 or 2022, asking people on LinkedIn, what is your plan for the well-being of your HR teams? And this was the response. So while we're focused, in fact, if you Google HR teams and burnout, most of what you find will be about us helping others, which is what we do. However, if most of us are burnt out, it's about time that we focus on our needs as well. Because many of us will just sit in the midst of it and think this is fine. Here's something that I hear a lot from some of my HR brothers and sisters, which is, well, yes, of course it's hard. This is the job, right? I shouldn't feel the way I feel because nothing I'm doing is beyond the scope of HR, but we actually need to pay more attention to our own needs. So, quick quiz, first chance to interact. Here are here are a number of statements about burnout. And in the chat, if you could share with me, how many of these do you think are myths? How many of these statements are false? And Amy, no cheating, because I think I did this one for you a couple weeks ago. Zero or false, says Morgan. Anyone else want to chime in? Yes. So, yeah, none of these are false. I'm sorry, none of these are true. Hello, wake up. None of these are true. So burnout is not new. We're going to talk about that. Only essential workers experience burnout. Wrong. It is a scientific term. That was a big aha for me when I was going through my experience of burnout. And it isn't something that can be easily overcome by just chilling out on a weekend. So yes, lots of myths floating out there about burnout. Here's one that I think most people are surprised by. There's been research on burnout within HR since 1992. So for 30 years, we've been studying, we being academia, has been studying the emotional weight and stresses of being in HR. And look at some of the things they list as being increases, I call them accelerants of burnout within the function. Not feeling valued, lack of appreciation, having a unique position, which can increase our loneliness. We'll talk about that later. Poor communication and not looping HR in. I literally had this conversation with someone earlier today of how, they don't get pulled in until the last minute. And wouldn't it be great if we were actually part of the project and yada, yada. And lack of opportunities to grow beyond HR, right? Once you're HR'd, it's hard to un-HR. And so not really seeing opportunities to grow. I mean, think about this. How many organizations have the head of HR not at the C-suite, right? So these things can hinder us within our function. So I always want to check in on how everyone's doing. So we're going to do a very quick burnout assessment. So get a pen and a piece of paper. You're going to score and respond to the following, I think it's like 13 questions, and then add them up at the end. So here's the first one. I just feel like quitting. If you feel like this very often, give that a 5. If you never feel like quitting, give that a 1. We'll use the same scale throughout the rest of these. Next one, I don't take pride in my work. I feel like my workplace is toxic. I don't have as much time to plan as I like. I don't think positively about my job. I don't feel like I have anyone to talk to. I feel unappreciated or undervalued. People or issues easily get on my nerves. I feel low physical or emotional energy. I can be unpleasant with people when they don't deserve it. I seem to be forgetting things or not as sharp as I once was. I don't feel like I'm winning as much as I would like. I'm unclear or confused about what I need to do at work. Okay, add that up. And if you feel comfortable, put your score in the chat. Let's see how we're doing. Even if you're in the 13 or 17, if there's anything you answered 5 to, I think it's still worthwhile participating in our session, because this can give you insight into not just yourself, but also your team. I'm seeing a lot of things showing up here in that higher range. You're in the right place. We're going to talk about what these risks are, some things that accelerate this for us in HR. And Lily, I think that's the highest score so far. So you win. That's a crappy award, but you win it. So we're going to talk about this now. If this is something where you're really concerned, you have a high score and you're like, ew, I need to know more, reach out to me. I have the MBI, which is the more well-known, the kind of gold standard assessment that I can give you. And I'm happy to do that for free. So just reach out to me, DM me, send me a note. Send me a TikTok, because I'm one of those kind of gals now. I'm on the TikToks. All right, so taking the moment to just check in with yourself is actually one of the most important things that you can do when it comes to building your resiliency and coping. And so very often we don't take the time to do that. So thank you for doing that. So let me talk about 6 different common, well-known, and well-documented burnout causes. Again, I call them accelerants of burnout. It isn't that if I have this, I am therefore burnt out, but more watch outs, things that have been known to increase our likelihood to decrease our well-being and our mental health at work. So here's one. Having too much to do and not enough time. Put an exclamation point in the chat if that sounds at all familiar to your work these days. Yes. So good, I'm not alone. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. Yes, I like the multiple exclamation points. Yeah, having too much to do and not enough time, the strain of being under-resourced, we know this to be true. Some of us thrive right in that environment, but sustained over time, it decreases your ability to cope and to bounce back, and things that would normally not bother us send us spinning into orbit. So this is something to pay attention to, and a good reason to set boundaries.
And so when I, early in my career, could just work because that was fun for me, and I would do it a lot, and some probably more than I should. And then I had kids, and I hope for everyone, whether you have kids or not, you should have something outside of work that's as important to you and as part of who you are. That's not just work. But the thing for me that helped me learn that was when I had kids. And I have 3 boys, and there were literally, for my oldest, I was a single mom for quite a while. So there were literally like hard stops on what I couldn't do. Like I was the one that had to leave at a certain time. Even if our executive meeting was going long, I had to say, I'm out of here, guys. Sorry, I got to pick up my kid from daycare. Enjoy. Let me know how it goes. And those were some really hard things for me to do, because I also, kind of your point, Stephen, like feeling a lot of loyalty and ownership and wanting to serve people. It's hard to be the one that like puts something down. But because I had other places that depended on me, I had to. And then I had to learn how to fit in all of those things so that I felt like I could give the parts of me in the best way possible to all of the things that were important to me. And so I think having something like that, whether it's kids or something you do in the community or faith or whatever it is outside of work that is as important to you, that you can also kind of have as a balance to your commitment to the workplace, I think that also helps, gives you some perspective.
So one of the things, and Kim's a chief people officer for Arise, so she's one of us. So what, as we think about setting those boundaries, for some of us, we can say, oh, that's hilarious, that's cute, that's adorable, but there's nothing wrong with you for setting boundaries. In fact, you would coach others to do that. So paying attention to the boundaries we set and getting comfortable being uncomfortable with setting those boundaries. We're going to talk about some of these tactics later. That's something for us to pay attention to when it comes to our HR function. Second one, lack of control over the work or unclear decision making. So feeling like you don't have autonomy to make the decisions that impact the work you do, that will accelerate the risk of burnout. So having to spin around and get a bunch of different people to approve a thing that you already know the right answer to, that will increase your exhaustion. So that's something to pay attention to. Lack of job security, not feeling that your job will exist tomorrow, heavy layoffs. These are things that have been documented over and over again as accelerants to anxiety and potential depression and overall emotional decline. This is a big one, especially for HR, where in many cases, culture is part of our mandate. If we can't live the values of our organization or are not aligned with those values, and then we have to be the ones who articulate it and bring it to life for the organization, that conflict creates a moral breakage within us that, again, increases our stress response and puts us at risk for things like compassion fatigue, which we can talk about another session or you can follow with me on, but essentially which detaches us from our emotions over time. Lack of support or appreciation, right? Not feeling like what you do is valued by the organization. Again, that increases and accelerates the risk for burnout. Lack of role clarity is a big one. I talk about this one a lot. Role clarity is a great way to also create psychological safety because we're clear about what we own and what will be measured against. Another guest from one of the events I've been on, she spoke about it this way.
And then there's one of the big things is like lack of role clarity. And I can tell you in HR, I find I've been at small companies, I've been at large, Fortune 100 companies, and the definition of what HR does, where they start and stop, is completely different in everywhere I've worked. And even titles are wildly different. So you can easily find yourself in a role that you were HR generalist for 10 years and you go to a company and you're like, this is not what I know how to do. And, oh, this isn't what I expected. And, or like you get hired for this job description and then you walk in and you're like, whoa, that's not at all what I'm doing. And that is just the reality. And so lack of role clarity can play, a big part. And Al was talking about this before, but even just, there's gaps in like what your skill set is. And so maybe your skill set is X, Y, and Z, and this role is either evolved to need A, B, and C, or maybe they thought they needed X, Y, Z and they really needed A, B, C. And you're in this role and you're like, I don't have the skills to actually do this.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the main causes for me when I experienced burnout in late 2020, early 2021 is I'm an OD person, I'm a talent person, I'm a learning person. And I was really being expected to do a lot in the payroll space, which has a lot of detail. And I mean, I tried really hard, but I was terrible at it. And that caused me to ultimately burn out. So as I said, these things can exist and you can take them in stride and have coping mechanisms and resiliency skills that make them not burn you out, right? It's just a thing that comes up every once in a while, but maybe there are specific triggers for you due to your past history, due to just how you're wired, and or in combination, you don't get a chance to come up for air, and that's what can ultimately lead to burnout. So it isn't an equation as much as it's information about the things that can lead to burnout versus a definition. However, there are 3 known symptoms of burnout. And I mentioned earlier the MBI assessment. There's a lot of other burnout assessments, but they tie back to these 3 known documented symptoms of burnout. And those are exhaustion, bone tired, physical or emotional exhaustion. You just don't have the energy to get things done, get out of bed. It's gone, right? Cynicism, lack of trust in others, a disbelief in the intention of others. Not a great look for us in HR, but can happen if we're in burnout. And then the third one is, a lot of times you'll see this referred to as performance ability or other things like that. I call it cognition, but basically our ability to do the things we used to be able to do with ease. This was a big one for me, for example. I couldn't understand why I wasn't able to do the things I used to be able to do easily. And that was a symptom of my burnout. So these are just some things that we assess against as we think about burnout. So if you had a high score and these are looking familiar, it might be time to start looking at getting some support and some help. And I can talk about where you can get that here in a bit. Before we move on to the specific ones within HR, are there any questions or comments? We have about 31 people on the call, so I'm just keeping us off microphone, but in the chat, anybody want to have any comments or questions so far while I hydrate? Okay. All right. I'm going to take that as we're good. Let's keep going. I can't wait to learn more. This is awesome. Now, this is kind of a roller coaster ride. I say this on all my presentations, is that we're going to go into the things that make us sad, but then I'm going to give you some tactics so that we can move out of that space. But I just want us to be aware of the things that impact us, not because we're flawed, not because we're not strong, but because they've been actually scientifically proven to impact the vast majority of people in our space. Okay, so this is so we can all feel like, okay, it's not just me. The first one is a hazard around those dramatic extremes on a regular basis. I used to, because I was in learning and development and I had a lot of peers as HR business partners, and I used to say to them, what you describe as every day, I would describe as my worst day because of all the things we have to deal with, right? We go from fire to fire. And I love these quotes. These quotes came from both that article from the 90s as well as recent posts on Reddit. So it's like we run the gamut. So those dramatic extremes on a regular basis can cause our stress levels to rise and fall, or constantly stay at that high state. And again, without being able to have those coping mechanisms or time to respond or bounce back, that can create exhaustion leading to burnout. So think about it. How often do you go from one extreme to another? The quote we had, like from a love triangle to, a new baby, right? So, or to, a promotion to a riff, like it can just go from one extreme to the other.
Kind of coaxing them through, and then it started coming out, and it was a room of HR people, a whole room of HR people, 100 of us in a space. And it's like, how do you deal with this stuff? How do you deal with this stuff when you see it happen and you just keep gathering it and holding it in, and then you have to deal with it. So but gathering it in as an HR person is also building on that trauma. For those of us that are in the space very heavily right now, it's really important. Step out of that space. Don't read any more books on Black or Indigenous history that day. Step right out of the space. Turn off the TV. One of the participants said about putting in music that has no words, and just kind of, I guess it's what I was doing, being mindful and just kind of peel away that piece. Otherwise, it just pulls you in, right?
And Ingrid heads up diversity, equity, inclusion for Walmart Canada. I need to put their titles on here. Note to self. So number 2, the increasing complexity of our function. I mean, the last 2.5 years, think about all the things we've had to learn, things we never thought we'd have to deal with. And this was a quote from 1992 of, I have to be an attorney, a workers' comp expert, a psychologist, an equal employment specialist. I mean, we are, and these are all good things, right? Rolling out DEI, helping people with their well-being and mental health, managing vaccines, like that was a whole thing. Remember when in the winter when we were like, okay, check everybody's, reporting on it. It's all over the place as far as the increasing complexity of what we do. And all of that complexity, studies show you can only really manage 3 to 5 things at one time, like in your head. Not multitasking. We know multitasking doesn't actually work, but learning 3 to 5 things new at one time. We've exceeded that. So think about how much has changed within your function. And think about this. Going into 2020, what were your priorities? And how did those compare to your priorities planning for 2023? Are they the same? Are you back to where you were? Have they completely changed? Go ahead and toss in the chat. Same, different. Early 2020, pre-pandemic, February to now. Same, different. Go ahead and join us in the chat. Okay, so not just me. Thank you for that.
I think we've been in a period of extended and tremendous uncertainty. And, I think that the reality is, like, things are not going to change. They're not going to get more clear. We're going to have, a period where we're going to need to continue to lead our organizations through difficult decisions, through change. And, that, depending on, our personality, that can be an extremely draining place to be.
So giving ourselves credit for all the new things we've learned and how much we've grown in those 2.5 years. Think about the last time you said, oh my gosh, good job, me. Look at how much I've learned. Just take a break and appreciate how much you've grown, how much you've learned. All right, next one. This is a big one, loneliness. So loneliness and that detachment from others, we are communal creatures, right? We evolved as tribes, as organizations together. So being isolated goes against our nature and how we evolved to thrive. So when we don't pay attention to our needs for human connection, it can really weigh on us and increase our likelihood of burnout. But think about all the ways that we have to isolate ourselves. In fact, let me ask you in the chat, what are some reasons why HR might be one of the loneliest positions in the company? Confidential. Yep. Can't share a lot of information, confidential information, holding secrets. People don't understand the balance and trying to protect the company as well as helping others. That's right. There's often a misinterpretation that, oh, they just care about the company, they don't care about the people, or, oh, they just care about the people, they don't care about the company. People don't see us as friends. Yep. I was speaking to someone this morning about this, and she was saying, they're going to the sales conference, the sales offsite. I'm not going. 1, they don't want me there. 2, I don't want to deal with it. I just don't. People don't trust people who work in HR. They forget that we're colleagues and treat us like the Grim Reaper, Vicki. That's so true. That's so, That's terrible. Who wants to be that? No one wants to be that. That's terrible. But that's what we deal with, right? And so it can be very lonely. Again, not to feel sorry for ourselves, but more to understand and appreciate. That's hard. And it goes against our nature as humans. And so thank you again for sharing all of your inputs about what can happen if we appear too close to someone at work, right? We can appear to have bias. And oh, heaven forbid you have to have a riff or a performance conversation with a person that you care about. Exactly. Thank you so much, Denise. They don't realize that we're also humans, right? And so sometimes we don't realize that we're also humans. So that's one of the things I hope you take away from today, is that you are also a human and deserve to be cared for. I talked about value and appreciation being one of the big drivers of burnout. This can be a big problem in HR. This was a quote that actually came from 2020 about HR professionals still not feeling included in strategic decision-making, still not feeling like they have a seat at the table, still not feeling like their voices are heard. And this can decrease our sense of value and worth, which we're going to learn about right now. Oh, maybe we're not. It'll come later. But one of the things to think about for you, think about the value of your function, has the resourcing and budget, the investment in the ability for you to do the work increased at the same rate as the volume of work. And it's not going to be dollar for dollar, right? We can get economies of scale, but are you constantly looking to do more with less? For many of us, we're an HR department of one. Even though the organization has grown, complexity has grown, we're expected to be that one person that takes care of everything. Or we don't have the systems or tools to do the work that we need to do. How many of us are still using Excel? Where instead of having a system to help us with reporting and being able to have
ourselves. Do we measure our sense of self and our capability?
Hold on, Matt. So I love how Matt talks about value versus worth, because this is an important thing for us in HR. So let me go ahead and hit
ourselves. Do we measure our sense of self and our capability based on value or based on worth? And I want to teach you guys what the difference is. Okay. So value is about our socially created sense of self. The feedback we got from our parents and our teachers and our friends and our boss and our peers and the 360 evaluation, right? All of these things that other people have told us about who we are. And we create a sense of self around that we call value. So when others are pleased with our work, we feel valuable. And when others don't like our work, we don't feel valuable, right? When others are giving us positive feedback, we feel good. And when our boss wants to come talk to us, we feel bad, like we're being called into the principal's office. And so that's social value. And that's how most people gain a sense of capability, right? Now there's another option. And that other option is an internal sense of self instead of the external sense of self. Now, I'm not saying it's one or the other. In fact, it's a healthy balance. We need a healthy balance between the feedback we're getting from outside of ourselves and the feedback we're getting inside of ourselves. But I have found I don't have to help people gain more feedback from outside of themselves. Everybody's pretty good at that. The challenge is gaining that internal sense of worth, that connection with ourselves. Okay. How do we?
So that internal sense of worth, that internal understanding of the value that we bring and how we define our own worth as opposed to looking outside of ourselves. That can be a big hazard, especially when you're in a service function like we are. And so paying attention to, are we over-indexing on the value and not spending enough energy focusing on our own internal sense of worth? Number 5 is our problem focus on the job. So I did another session on this called toxin handling. There's actually been research on what's called toxin handling, which is absorbing the negative emotions of others and how the emotional weight and the impact that has on our well-being. So when we focus on problems a lot, and this can happen in social work, this can happen in a wide variety of industries, our job is included in that. it can be emotionally exhausting and require us to do more work to make sure that we have what we need to thrive. And so sometimes, especially if you're in employee relations, I spend a lot of time working with folks who are in employee relations. I partner with a company called HR Acuity on this, and we do well-being work with them as well. It can just feel like you just want to hear something good every once in a while.
Because a lot of times as HR, we're dealing with a lot of stuff. Sometimes stuff that's triggers our ethical compass, that makes us feel like, you know, I know better, I could have done better, I should have done better, but I didn't. Either because I fell to or succumbed to the pressure of leadership, succumbed to whatever pressures the organization was putting on me, and I did or said something that I shouldn't have. So the F is for forgiveness. In order to move on, in order to have a good relationship with yourself means you have to have a good relationship with forgiving yourself. We talk a lot about loving ourselves, but we don't talk enough about forgiving ourselves. You can't love yourself if you don't forgive yourself. And so I think it's important to sit in the mirror or stand in the mirror. And in those moments when you've done stuff in your job that, or in your life in general, that has caused you to feel like, I should have done better, I should have known better, then when you get that moment, stand in that mirror and say to yourself, you know what, I forgive you. Because in the moment, you for whatever reason, weakness, whatever imperfection, you didn't do better, but now you know that you should do better. And so I think that F is really important.
Julie, when she was saying F, she has an acronym she uses. I think it's SAFE or something like that. But we were talking about psychological safety for HR teams. And so that giving ourselves grace, forgiving ourselves, treating ourselves with kindness, we're going to talk about that here in a second. Finally, the last hazard before we start talking about some solutions and tactics, which we will get to, is that high exposure. When we make a mistake, it can have a lot of impact on the business. It can be very expensive and high risk. And so that high risk of the job, that increases the propensity for burnout and emotional exhaustion, especially when we're entering territory that we've never been in. I got a lot of calls from HR teams this summer when the Roe v. Wade was overturned, because many folks hadn't ever planned for what they would do from a benefits perspective. What's the company response? Employees are asking lots of questions. These are things nobody had prepared for. And so that high risk, especially as things become pretty politicized, can create emotional strain. And so often we have to make judgment calls without actually knowing what the right answer is.
The AMSO model is awareness, motivation, skill building, and opportunity to practice. And what we tend to do is just continue to create awareness. I'm going to let you know about this, and I'm going to let you know about this. And we're like, yeah, we get it. I know. But you don't get the tools. And what I love is that, you know, some of the people who are on this call, right, like Al and Jay and Hannah, you know, you guys are solving some of this problem, or at least you're putting forward a solution, because I do think that there is a challenge that people don't know where to start. Okay,
so Philip's reminding me that I have to give you tools and not just tell you about the problems. So let's go ahead and get into that, shall we? Here are some things that you can do based on scientific research on burnout in the workplace, burnout recovery, building resiliency, and creating a thriving and psychologically safe organization. I've read hundreds, thousands of research studies on this. So this isn't just me making some things up. This is based on neuroscience and cognitive behavior theory and research into workplace wellness. Okay, so number one, listen to yourself. Now that sounds weird, right? What am I going to do? Talk to myself? Here's the thing. We don't spend enough time actually checking in with ourselves. A lot of times we spend in busyness, talking to others, thinking about what's coming, thinking about what's happened. But research shows that if you spend just 15 minutes every day After 10 days, you will see a 25% improvement in your overall well-being. Okay, let's find that 15 minutes for you. Brushing your teeth, waiting for a Zoom call. This is gross, but going to when you're in the bathroom, washing your hands. There are tiny spaces throughout the day that you can take to just say, how am I doing? How am I feeling? And when you're not feeling well, listen rather than judge and try to suppress. And here's to the judgment part. So in my research, one of the main tactics that you can use to help build resiliency is self-compassion. Now, self-compassion is not the same thing as self-care. I'm not talking about a mani-pedi, although that's amazing too, highly recommended. But what I'm talking about is speaking to ourselves with kindness. Often our internal dialogue, we would never say to anyone else. We can be very negative when we talk to ourselves. So practicing self-kindness, speaking to yourself like you would a best friend, can rewire your brain. It activates the nurturing parts of your brain. It activates basically your positive, what they call your positive affect, which is essentially happiness, and increases overall life satisfaction. When we talk to ourselves like we would someone that we love, we are able to create the resources to support others. So it's not an act of selfishness, rather, it's an act of investing in yourself so that you can care for others. Creating presence through mindfulness. Now, this is not meditation. I'm not going to spread the good word about meditation. I'm actually a terrible meditator. Horrible. But I do practice mindfulness, and here's the difference. Mindfulness in Chinese is the combination of heart and now. So think about it as checking in and observing your thoughts and feelings in the current moment. There's been just study after study after. I really did not want it to be true because I'm so terrible at it. But it is true that when we focus on just being present and checking in, it can calm us. It decreases our stress hormones, helps get us out of activation, and gets us into more thoughtful and present decision making. So there's a simple tactic, actually. Let's go ahead. I think we have time, called box breathing. So let's do that now. All we're going to do is 4 breaths, and we're going to follow along. We're all sitting at our Zoom. We're all going to follow along, inhaling as our eyes go across the top of our screen, and then exhaling in the corners. So let's do that 4 times and go all around the box of our screens. So let's inhale and exhale. Inhale, exhale, inhale and exhale, inhale and exhale. So the next time you're on a Zoom call and you want to just jump through that screen or turn it off and run away, try that box breathing. And there, you've done mindfulness. Not so hard. Acceptance is another key one. That shows up heavily in the research. Acceptance is not giving up. It's not just passive resignation. It is identifying what we can and cannot control. And often we can't control much. Here's something that I hear a lot from HR leaders. If only I would have done a better job articulating my business case, then I could get the executives to buy in. No, you did a great job. Accept that they aren't able to understand it or hear it in the way that it was presented. Maybe there's something that you can do differently, sure. But accept that you can't control the behaviors of others. You can only modify and pay attention to your needs and how you show up. So practicing acceptance isn't giving in. It's only striving to control what we can control and not things we can't. Here's another one, sticking to our values. This is really important. So Julie was talking about this a little bit earlier about self-forgiveness. When we make decisions, and we make hard decisions in HR, it's important that we do them with our values in mind. And the thing about our values and knowing what's important to us personally is that that helps us also decide what we can just let go, because it doesn't really matter when it comes to my values. So sometimes we get worked up about things just on the principle of it. But if we step back and look at it within the context of what's important to us, it loses meaning and importance, right? That email that I got that just sent me over the edge, how important is it that that person said that in the long term? Maybe it is, and this is the thing that I'm going to stand up against, but maybe it's not. So check in with yourself regularly and make sure that you're really clear. This is why listening to ourselves is important, about what's important to you. Setting values and goals. Why am I here? What am I doing? What is my purpose? As I define my worth, and how important is this situation within that context? Be patient with yourself. This is another one. In HR, often we struggle with perfectionism. We expect that we're going to do everything flawlessly, that we'll never make a mistake, and that is humanly impossible. So some days you're going to feel sad. Some days you're going to feel overwhelmed. Some days you're going to feel exhausted or cynical, all the things. And that's okay. The thing is to pay attention to the feeling, identify where it's coming from, and be patient and gentle with yourself as you find new ways to resolve that and bounce back differently.
As we start the day, we have a full enlarged balloon. As we go about our work day, as we face challenges and tasks, and even just the transactional parts of our role, we expire air from our balloon, and it gets smaller and smaller, and that's normal. That's exactly how it should be. However, we end our work shift and go home with a much smaller balloon, which is fine as long as we have strategies and a regime to refill that balloon of mental health, so we can start the next day with a suitably bolstered balloon. Otherwise, if we go to the next day without any consistent means of refilling our balloon, we become much more vulnerable. The psychological term is labile, to difficulties and stressors. And so we might respond with emotional activation to a stressor that we would previously have just taken in our stride out.
I love talking to Christopher because he is a psychologist who works in Australia, obviously from the accent, with major construction projects in Melbourne and sports teams. Because in Australia, they focus a lot on psychological safety and mental health in the workplace. But he's right, if that we don't have these skills and resources to help us bolster our balloon, right, to take care of ourselves, then we're more activated and we're less able to support others. We're more sensitive and we put ourselves at higher risk for burnout. I talked about perfectionism, so expect to make mistakes. Know that you'll make mistakes. One of the things you can do that can help when you do make a mistake is think about it within the context of time. How important will this mistake be to me in a week, or in 5 minutes, or in 5 months, or in 5 years? Sometimes we can over respond or over index on how big a mistake is relative to the context of time. Another way you can respond when you make a mistake is to think about other people have made the same mistake or worse, or I've made bigger mistakes and been fine. So that context and really thinking about those mistakes as opposed to beating ourselves up, that's a better way to bounce back and to build that resiliency. Creating psychological safety. I have a whole other session on what psychological safety is, but looking at, are there structures and processes in the work that we do that hinder my ability to thrive? We talked about role clarity as a great example. If it's unclear, if everyone attacks every problem, the stress that can create is just unmeasurable. So look for structures, processes. Maybe you don't have the right system. Maybe the system you have is broken. Maybe it's time to invest in an upgrade. Look at the structures and systems that you use to see if any of those are actually accelerating the risk of burnout on your team. And this is what I'm terrible at. So maybe someone here can be my accountability partner, but taking care of the basics: exercise, hydrate, eat healthy, all the things we know we're supposed to do. If we don't take care of our physical self, it's really hard for our mental self to thrive. And so make sure that you're sleeping, you're doing the things that you need to do in order to be healthy. I have a friend who is a wellness coach, and he suffers from anxiety, but he also goes into freeze mode when he's overly stressed. And so he has a Post-it that says, feeling anxious, have you eaten? Because he'll forget to eat. I don't have that problem, but he'll forget to eat. And so often his anxiety will come up for him when he has it. Thank you, Cindy. Thanks for the comment. Okay, last but not least, connect to others. So there's 30 people on this presentation right now. Reach out to someone on LinkedIn. Connect with another HR friend. If we're lonely at work because we have confidential information, find someone that you can talk to about that, right? Make a human connection. We are creatures that need to have social connection. That's how we evolved. And so connect with me, at least. I love friends, so feel free to reach out anytime. But connecting with others, find your group. We have an HR Wellbeing LinkedIn group that you're welcome to join. And there's about 250 HR professionals on there talking about our emotional well-being. HR Acuity has a page. There's places where there's new Slack channels where you can connect with people, but find your HR friends so that you can run ideas by them. And oh my gosh, can you believe that this thing that this person did? Sometimes you just need to hear that somebody else has experienced the same thing. It can make a huge difference. All right. In addition, here are some other resources. So I worked with the woman, Hannah Hardy-Jones in New Zealand. We created an app called Kite HR, which is full of micro-learning, specifically geared toward HR. So it has daily, just one little thing for you to do every day, specifically geared toward the things that create burnout in HR. I mentioned the LinkedIn group. There's Ben Eubanks does a summer camp group. I think he'll probably do other ones, HR school. The HR Wellbeing link, I'll put it in the email I send out to everyone, Lisa, because I'm not that multi-talented to be able to get that and not have everybody get lost. Reach out to companies like ours to help you. You're welcome to help you with maybe having a team offsite. I've done this for a handful of HR teams, and it has just been transformational. Just coming together and sharing our experiences, building these resources together, taking the resiliency program. These can be very helpful. Also, there are people like me who specialize in coaching for HR, who've been there, done that, and can be a sounding board for you. So you can seek folks out who can support you if you feel like you need it, or if you're trying to decide based on what you've learned today, like maybe this isn't the place for me, or I need to do something different. So there's lots of people out there who can support you.
I recently went through a resiliency training. I'll say it's actually Al, so Dr. Al. And if you, as an HR professional, kind of thinking maybe to some of the talent development, learning professionals out there, if you've not looked and offered something yet to your organization, then this is your opportunity to think about doing that, and then be part of that pilot. Or if you already have these resources in your organization, go through that training. I often felt like I kind of had my arms around this, and I use a phrase in leadership development that leaders need to be reminded much more than they need to be taught. And I think that's the case here. These solutions, it's not like we have this, we unlocked the secret of the universe here, but we need to be reminded of these things. And so being intentional and going through a training and, or reading some articles and those kinds of things to remind you of these things that have worked for you in the past, or maybe learn something new to try that you haven't tried before.
I call Kim, she's one of my various gurus. She's so smart and talented. So anyway, I like how she talks about that, which is, this isn't about necessarily us being taught. This is about us doing what we would do for others in many cases. But isn't that the classic, cobbler's children have no shoes, right? So all I'm advocating for is to take a moment and care for yourself as you would someone else. And so you deserve it. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will send an email with this recording. If you have any questions or comments in the chat, feel free to share. Thanks so much for taking an hour out of your very busy day on you. Often we don't do that. And so thank you for taking care of yourself today. And I will hang out here in case there are questions. Thanks everyone for the comments. I really appreciate it. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. We don't need to record that.